Welcome to Athar's Garage. In this video, I'll be working on the Schumacher LD3 stock spec, steps 11 through 13. So let's get started. So for step 11, we're going to use the brass pivot block instead of the plastic one that came in the kit. All right, so we have our brass pivot block. So there are essentially 4 holes in the center where the steering links can install. We're going to install the screws in the outermost holes, which is going to be this one here and that one over here. And we're going to apply a bit of blue Loctite to the threads, since this will be going into some metal. All right, I just have my driver holding the screw in place. We're going to install the black alloy washer, this right here, first. Then we're going to install our steering link. The steering link looks symmetric, so we're going to install a bearing. On the side that is offset, so we installed a bearing over here, so we can go ahead and insert that. Next, we're going to install the D shim, which is a 4 by 5.6 shim. Then we'll install another bearing. Make sure that bearing sits flush. And next we're going to install this piece here. And we're going to install it with this hex facing up. And that's a 5.5 millimeter hex, so you can use your 5.5 millimeter wrench to grab onto it and tighten it up. Make sure everything moves nice and free, like it should. I think the bearings are just a little bit of friction in the bearing, but it can move under its own weight. That's exactly what we want. So we can go ahead and do the other side. So this particular shim, the D shim that goes between the bearings, is 4 by 5.6. That is actually going to sit and that in between the bearings in this diameter here. So you have to make sure that when you install your bearings, so say for example I installed the bearing there, this is going to sit on top of that bearing in that gap, in that diameter. Otherwise the other bearing that you put on there will not fit properly and not sit flush, and that's going to cause some issues. So again, a little bit of blue Loctite on the M3 by 12 screw. We're going to put it in the outermost hole. Hold it in place with our driver. Next, we can install the B shim, which is the black alloy washer. Then we can install the bell crank assembly with this nut. Okay. I think the bearings are just have a little bit of stiction in there, but it moves under its own weight, which is what we want. So now we can move on to step 12. This is what it will look like in step 11. And from the bottom, you see that we installed the two M3x12 screws on the outermost holes. So this is the center track rod. I'm going to trim some of this plastic. All right, so this is the top of the center track rod. So you'll see where the ball studs install are all going to be facing the top. So we're going to install the two long ball studs with the 2mm black washers in this hole and this hole. And they will be facing the front of the vehicle, like so. Now we can install the small black ball stud in the opposite direction in this hole here. And we're going to need to use a 5.5mm wrench to install. There we go. So now we can move on to installing this onto the pivot block and steering bell crank assembly. So let's go ahead and install the bearings from the bottom. So let's install one on each of the bell cranks, just like so. Then from the top, we're going to install the E-shim. The E-shim is 4x5.6. We're going to make sure that it's sitting on that bearing. Next, we can install our other bearing. And the bearings are going to sit flat. So make sure that they're sitting flat. If they're not sitting flat, that 4x5.6 shim is probably not seated correctly. So now we're going to install the two M3x12 button head screws from the top of the center track rod in these two holes. Hold those screws so they don't fall out. We're gonna install the two M3 steel washers and then apply some blue Loctite to both those screws. We can then insert the two screws into the holes, into the two bearings. Just line those up. There we go. And then we can go ahead and install these nuts. So the steering assembly is done. As you can see, it moves under its own weight. So nothing is too tight. That's exactly what we want. So that's what the assembly looks like after step 12. So now we can get bag 13. Nice molded piece. This might be the lower deck. I don't know exactly what it's called, but it's the kick up for the front of the chassis. It's a nice piece of plastic, feels very sturdy. I've seen a few of these break, so I'm not a huge fan of the plastic kick up, but it is what it is. Looks like we also need to get the pivot block height. It's a little spacer that goes between the pivot block and this lower deck here. So let me find that. So it looks like it's in the S2 bag, and there's only one size in there. So this will sit on that just like so, and it will raise up this pivot block. So we just have to line up these 3 holes with these 3 holes in the pivot block. Now, if you're using the brass pivot block, I recommend using blue Loctite. If you're not using the brass one and you're using the plastic one, then you don't need to use Loctite. If you're using the aluminum one, I would recommend Loctite as well. So everything still moves nice and free. So that's it for step 13. So that's it for this video. That covers step 11, 12, and 13. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe if you did. Let me know down in the comments if you had any issues, any tips or tricks to make this easier. That'd be helpful to the community. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.